Today I'm smoking a brisket on the brand new Goldees Backyard Offset. Best brisket I've ever made at home. Today I'm not using just any regular grocery store brisket. Instead, I'm using a brisket from Porter Road. So as many of you know, I travel a lot and go to like really good barbecue places. And let me tell you, the briskets at these spots are phenomenal. And it is so hard for me to come back home and then try and make a grocery store brisket at home because it just does not have that same rich, beefy flavor that I get at those restaurants. And a big reason why there's this gap in flavor difference is because these restaurants use beef that are pasture raised just like Porter Road. Of all the beef sources that I have tried thus far, Porter Road is the only one that I have tasted that has given me that rich flavor that I'm talking about. And another cool thing about Porter Road is they come pre-trimmed. So even though they're a little bit more expensive than like a grocery store brisket, there is just so much less waste. So in a way, you're almost paying the same price per pound. Look, you're already gonna spend like 12 to 14 hours cooking a brisket. You already have so much time invested into this. Don't skimp out on the quality. And right now, if you use the link in my description box, you will get 15% off your entire order. There's no codes, just use the link in the description box and the discount will apply automatically. I have been a customer of Porter Road for years, so thank you Porter Road for sponsoring this video. But if you get an untrimmed brisket from a different source, just make sure when you're trimming it, you make sure that the brisket is nice and round. You want no parts sticking out, because again, we're gonna cook this in the Goldees smoker, and let me tell you, the Goldees Offset has so much draw and pull that anything that's sticking out is gonna get scorched, especially for a brisket cook, because we're gonna be cooking this thing for like 12 to 14 hours, and for that entire cooking time, it's gonna be directly in the heat. But even with this Porter Road brisket, I did trim it up a little bit. But if you're not like me and you don't have to worry about making a YouTube thumbnail, then you can completely leave a Porter Road brisket untrimmed. All right, now it's time for the seasoning. So because we're cooking this brisket on the Goldee smoker, I wanna season this like it's a Goldees brisket. So the first thing that we need is coarse pepper. So Johnny from Jerby's Barbecue is the first person that I saw putting coarse pepper on the brisket first, and let me tell you, at the restaurant, they do the same exact thing. Because if you put the salt or the finer seasonings on first, the pepper is gonna kind of flake off, especially as you're moving it around on the grates. And this is a Texas brisket, so you gotta make sure you have a nice peppery crust on it. So the next thing we need is salt, and this is just regular table salt, and that is exactly what Goldees uses at the restaurant. So if you've ever had a Goldees brisket, one of the first things you notice is that it's really salty. And the reason why that works so well for brisket is because brisket is so fatty. So that saltiness just cuts right through it and just gives you an incredible flavor. Like honestly, when you first try a Goldees brisket, it just like explodes with flavor in your mouth. And because brisket is such a massive piece of meat, it's really hard to over salt it. But at the same time, remember, this is a finer grain than coarse salt that you're probably used to using, so also be mindful of that. There's a balance. And the final coat of seasoning is this Goldees all-purpose rub. So this is the newest seasoning from Goldees. It's basically the same all-purpose that's in their brisket rub and their all-purpose, but without the pepper. So at the restaurant, they have these big vats of seasoning, and they basically season the brisket, the ribs, all of the proteins in the same way that I just did it, layer by layer. And this is basically just a small container of what they have in that large all seasoning container. So you can get this on their website at goldees.com, or you can also get it at the restaurant in Kennedale or at any Walmart in Texas. But you gotta be careful with this stuff because again, there is salt in it, and I believe pretty much all seasonals have salt in it unless you make it from scratch at home. So with this, I'm only gonna put one coat of this on the fat cap. We're not putting this on both sides. At that point, I think it'll be a little too salty. And there we go, the brisket is ready for the smoker, so let's go ahead and fire that up. Okay, let's talk about the wood. So I think the ideal wood to use for the Goldees Backyard Pit would be like those splits you can buy at Academy Sports. I think it's B&B splits, because those are kiln dried, and I believe Goldees uses kiln dried wood. But more importantly, the size of the split in the B&B bags is just ideal for the backyard smoker, and they have all types of wood flavors too, so you can get a bag of post oak, and then you're literally cooking like they do at Goldees. For me, I'm using this hickory that I usually run in my 250, and then I just cut it down with my Kindling Cracker XL to get smaller splits. So in terms of wood placement, for the beginning, I'm gonna be running this pit at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So Basically, all I'm trying to do is get the logs on top and get as little oxygen as possible because I want the smoker to get super smoky so we can get a ton of color on our brisket. And this is just the way I like to run the fire. I've only used this like 7 times and I'm still learning and trying out new things. And outside of just the wood placement, I'm also messing with the door, just keeping it as closed or open as I need to get more air in and to increase and decrease the temperatures. Okay, the wood's on. All we need to do is set the damper. So I'm gonna close the damper all the way down to 75% closed. And that may seem like a lot, but I'm telling you, this thing draws and pulls like crazy. So you'll even see it at 25%, you'll just see the smoke just barreling out of the smokestack. And I'm also gonna be using the water pan during this cook. And the reason why is because normally in a big barbecue joint, you have like 20 or 30 briskets on a 1,000 gallon smoker. But since I'm just cooking one brisket, there's not as much humidity as there would be if I was cooking it with a bunch of briskets in there. So adding a water pan kind of like emulates that humidity inside of the smoker. All right, so we're at almost exactly 5 hours. So let's go ahead and check on the brisket. All right, so we're getting some pretty nice color on the brisket. So one thing that you want to notice is that because we're going so low and slow, we are not getting the curl whatsoever. So normally if you followed instructions like most barbecue videos say, and you started the cook at like 275, what ends up happening is, yeah, the bark is going to be much darker at this standpoint, but also the thinner part of the flat, like right here, will start to curl. And because we're going so low and slow, we're not getting that right now. All right, so now we're ready for part 2 of this cook. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna increase the temperature once again. So before we were in a range of 200 to 225, now we're bumping up to 225 to 250 and a little closer to that 250 range. So again, at the beginning, I took 2 splits, put it on top of the coal bed and had them kind of going long ways inside of the firebox. But now all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna shift the logs to be perpendicular in the firebox. So basically the sides of the tube of the firebox is gonna kind of lift up the log. We're gonna get a little bit more airflow and the fire is gonna burn a little hotter than it was before. And we're gonna stay in that temperature range pretty much all the way until we get into the stall and we start to see the brisket really start to sweat. So this is my second really long cook in this smoker. Just yesterday, I did a practice run with a brisket, and I gotta say, I really like the way that this smoker maintains temperature. Once the logs catch, I just close the door, and then it kind of just rocks that way until it's time to put another split in. So for those of you who have already bought a Goldee smoker and it's on the way, I think you guys are gonna really like this pit. So at about the 9-hour mark, I knew that the brisket was reaching the stall because the bark was starting to set and I could see some moisture coming out of the brisket. So at that point, I increased the temperature once again and I basically finished out the cook at around 275 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And now the brisket is finally done and ready to wrap, and it's currently 11 o'clock at night. So all in all, this brisket cook was 15 hours long. But none of the sides of the brisket are crispy and the fat is completely rendered on top, and when I pick up the brisket, it's just nice and kind of malleable, but not completely like floppy in my hands. But because this was the longest cook I've ever done on the Goldees Offset, there is a lot of things that I learned and really liked about the smoker. And I also found another benefit to that pipe that attaches from the firebox to the cook chamber. So throughout the cook, but especially in the beginning of the cook, you have to either fan your flames or use like a leaf blower to basically get the coals to get enough air so that the wood can combust. And when you do that, a lot of times the ash from the firebox will like flow into the cook chamber, and then you end up getting like ash on your food, and it just makes a mess inside of the cook chamber. But with a Goldee smoker, especially at the beginning, every time I put a log in, I kind of had to fan the flames. No ash got inside of the cook chamber. I don't know if they designed it that way and had that in mind, but that is like a major plus. Just like every other step of this recipe, we're gonna wrap this Goldee style. So all we gotta do is get a big piece of foil, get our beef tallow here, which is just melted down beef fat, and then just put about a cup right in the center of the foil. And then just put the brisket directly on top of the fat with the lean side of the brisket in the fat. So we cook this fat cap up, and we're also wrapping it fat cap up because we want to make sure that the bark is perfect and nice when we're slicing it. And let me tell you, this brisket feels so good. The fat is nice, jiggly, and rendered. And when I was bringing it over here, just feeling how the meat flexed in my hands, I know that this brisket is gonna be so good tomorrow after it's done a nice long rest. Then we just wrap one side, wrap the other side, flip up, and that's all there is to it. So I'm gonna let this rest in my oven overnight at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we will slice it tomorrow and see how it turned out. So the fat is nice and pliable on top, and the sides are tender. They're not like super crispy, so I think this is gonna be a fantastic brisket, but there's only one way to find out, and that's to slice it. So I'm gonna take a piece from each, the point, the flat, and some of the burnt end. The yellow fat on the top just shows how well rendered this thing is. This bite is gonna be insane. All right, let's try flat. I'm telling you, don't be afraid of table salt. This is like perfectly seasoned. Then that nice deep beef flavor from the Porter Road brisket. This is killer. All right, so that was the flat. I'm gonna try my favorite part of the brisket, which is the flat end cap. So theoretically, right, this is supposed to be the driest part on the brisket. It's on the flat, which is the leaner half, and it's at the very edge of the brisket. So again, there's no camera tricks here, right? So I'm just gonna take it straight off. You saw me cut it. I didn't rub it, tallow on it or anything. I'm gonna show you exactly what it looks like. Dude, the Goldees Offset smoker. It just looks that good. Okay, gotta try a bite of this. If this is how the flat and the end cap of the flat tastes, I can't wait to taste the point. This is incredible. Now for the point and the burnt end. Best brisket I've ever made at home. And if you're interested in more information on the Goldees Offset Smoker, make sure to watch the next video on your screen where I did an in-depth review of it. And I'll see you guys over there.